We're now moving on to our final segment of the Michigan 11th District Democrats Oakland County Candidates Forum. We'll be meeting are we meeting both candidates? Do we have both candidates here, Kent? Do we have both candidates here?
Unfortunately, we do not. We just have Sharon McDonald at this time.
Okay.
Or Karen McDonald. I am so sorry, Karen.
That's okay.
It's been a long night.
Okay. Well, we're happy to have you here, Karen McDonald. The prosecuting attorney is the chief law enforcement officer of the county, charged with the duty to see that the state criminal laws are faithfully enforced. And as such, it's a position with a great importance to our criminal justice system. Unfortunately, many people lose interest by the time they get down to that part of the ballot, and or it's just due to lack of information or interest. And I know as a voter myself, I'm so grateful for forums like these where I can learn more about the choices that we have and basically learn about county government and how it operates. So I've learned so much from this forum and from the others that have happened. So thank you for being here, Karen. You probably know the drill by now, how we're doing this, but we will open up with your opening statement and you can take 2 minutes for that. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you. My name is Karen McDonald. I am a former circuit court judge. I stepped down from the bench a year ago. I did that because when you move from a nonpartisan seat to a partisan seat, you must step down a year ahead of the filing deadline. I served on the family court bench for 6.5 years. Prior to that, I was an attorney in private practice for about 7 years. And prior to that, I was actually an assistant prosecutor where I prosecuted mostly child sexual assault cases. So the first thing people ask me is, why would you give up such a great job as a judge, which I ran as a 5-person contested race in 2012. And the reason is I just got to the point that I felt as a judge, I couldn't really move the needle much. By the time litigants end in your courtroom, they've already been charged with a crime. And the judge, honestly, they can sentence people, but the person, like you just stated, that I'm so glad we're doing these forums, the most important person in the criminal justice system is the prosecutor. The prosecutor decides who's going to be charged with the crime and what crime they're going to be charged with. This is extremely important and powerful. And if any of you have had anybody in your family or in your circle, your personal or professional circle, have a substance abuse issue or a mental health issue, which, by the way, so many of the people in my courtroom were wrestling with those two issues, you know that the last place we want those people to end up is in jail or being incarcerated, because that's not solving any of the problem. And so what really moved me to take such a bold step is that our current prosecutor does not participate in any kind of treatment court. I believe in criminal justice reform. I believe that what we are doing right now is not working, and I'm not alone. This is a national movement. It's a state movement. And if you watch the news and everything that's going on right now, the moment is now to have reform and real change. So that's why I did what I did, and treatment courts and addressing the underlying reasons why people are going into the criminal justice system is at the core of criminal justice reform and reducing mass incarceration.
Thank you.
I don't have another person, so I don't know if I'm being held to the same. And I'm also wondering, am I how the whole thing is going to go?
Well, you'll get the full shot, the full treatment. We'll stick with the time segments, unless Kent tells me differently. I'll just stick with what I've told. But yes, we'll be going through the whole series of questions, and you'll be able to answer all of them. So
great.
The first question is, what is the ideal prosecutor's office to you?
I started in the prosecutor's office earlier in my career as an assistant prosecutor. It is truly a wonderful job that is a privilege. It's a privilege to serve the county. And it's filled with a lot of people who really want to do the right thing and advocate for victims of crime and seek the truth. And so what I believe is that we should have a prosecutor's office full of people that we treat like professionals. We give them discretion and empower them to use their own judgment, and that we're pushing forward and with the understanding that we need reform and change, and we're challenging ourselves to do this in a better way. That's what it looks like to me. But you know, the prosecutor's office can't do this alone. And one of the things that I intend to begin immediately on day one are advisory committees that you meet with from the community on a regular basis, not when you're just trying to get reelected. People from communities of color, people who come from the defense bar, community leaders. We need to know how we're doing. And we don't know unless we have we're willing to sit down and talk to people and listen to people. So that is, I think, very important.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
The next question. We have seen a significant shift in the public's mindset about Black lives and policing, specifically in handling policing cases. What would you see changing in the prosecutor's office on day one if you're elected?
Well, one of the most troubling things to me right now in the prosecutor's office is that in a recent forum, our current prosecutor, when we were asked almost this very exact question, said that she did not believe that we have racial disparity in Oakland County. And I that's troubling to me, but it's also, I think, just blatantly inaccurate. I spend a lot of my time in communities like Pontiac. And in fact, I was there for this afternoon handing out meals to people. And when I do that, I also talk to a lot of people, and they're not going to tell you that there's no racial disparity. We know what the data is going to show. Unfortunately, we don't at the moment have a prosecutor who's willing to be transparent. The way you start addressing racial disparity right now is by being transparent about who you're charging and what you're charging them with. That data is readily available. It's just not being released to the public. I'm quite sure it will show that we charge people of color at a much higher rate than we do anyone else. And we know that that population is not more prone to criminality. So that is on its face unfair and not just, and it's inherent racism, and we have to address it. And the way to address it is to understand what we're doing. You know, with regard to what's going on in our world right now, we had a George Floyd incident in Oakland County in 2014. A Black man, an unarmed Black man, was held down at the Northland Mall by 3 white security guards. He said for 9 minutes he could not breathe, and he was killed. And sometime after that, our current prosecutor held a press conference and stated she would not issue any criminal charges. So that's troubling. I mean, those 3 people walked away from that incident with not one criminal charge, not even an assault and battery. And that's the problem. We're seeing it's up in the news. It's being discussed now because of what happened with George Floyd, but we've already had that in Oakland County. I have always felt that this is the prosecutor's role, that part of criminal justice reform is addressing this. Right now, we know that our current criminal justice system hurts 2 groups of people more than any other: people of color and white and poor people. Mm-hmm. So we already know that this is a problem, and what we're seeing now is just really shining a light on that. And I have attended protests, and I have spent a lot of my time talking to leaders and listening and really trying to understand how we can make this better.
Thank you. The next question. What policies would you like to see the prosecutor's office implement in helping vulnerable populations, such as women, LGBTQ, and seniors?
One of the things that's most important to me is really focusing in a specialty way, assigning prosecutors to address our most vulnerable populations. So I will develop a hate crimes unit, which is assigning prosecutors to vertically prosecute those cases that are inspired by racial biases, how somebody identifies, ethnicity, and then also an elder abuse unit where we can really have a prosecutor who specializes in working with our vulnerable elderly people who are so prone to abuse. So that's number one. Number two is really creating an environment in the office where people are free to voice their opinion and work with victims of crime and also look for solutions so that we can try to address the underlying reasons why these things are occurring.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from the chat. How do you comment on the perception that there is a nexus between the prosecutor's office and the police force, that this interdependence prevents prosecutors all over the country from bringing charges against police officers?
I mean, I was an assistant prosecutor. I've been an attorney in private practice. I've been a judge. I understand that prosecutors and police officers work together. They're often witnesses in their cases. They testify on behalf of their case. They testify in courtrooms and they investigate crimes. But I believe it is my duty to be an independent, objective person when we know there's wrongdoing going on in law enforcement. And I stand for that, not just because it's wrong and we need to expose police officers who are engaging in illegal activities and hurting people, but also on behalf of law enforcement. They don't want those incidents to go unchecked. There are good, honest, hardworking law enforcement in this county. And if we don't have the courage and the leadership to hold the bad ones accountable, then we're really not doing anything for our community or law enforcement. So yes, it's a tough call to make, but you know what? I've been in the legal profession for over 20 years. And before that, I was a public school teacher. And more importantly, I've raised 5 teenagers. So I understand what it's like to make the tough call. And if I'm not willing to do it, then I shouldn't be in this position. So I am willing to do it. And I think with regard to the incident with Mackenzie Cochran that I just spoke of, you know, the video speaks for itself. Now the Attorney General is reviewing it because our current prosecutor wouldn't charge. Sure, that's the hard thing to do. But what's harder is just not addressing it and not holding people accountable, because you're turning your back on the people that are our most vulnerable. You're turning your back on communities of color. You're turning your back on people who need representation and don't get it. So sure, it's tough. And yes, it'll be difficult, but it's not as difficult as just ignoring somebody who died at the hands of a law enforcement official.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Will you support expungement applications for amounts of marijuana that are now legal, and support statewide legislation that creates automatic and retroactive expungement of marijuana charges?
Yes, I've on the record several times saying I support expungement of those convictions. I don't see how having those convictions remain on somebody's criminal history for behavior that is now not criminal serves anybody. It doesn't help the person. It prevents them from probably getting housing or employment that they need. And it's not helping our community. So it just doesn't make any sense. And again, I go back to, I'm running on a common sense platform, a progressive prosecution platform that focuses on and being smart on crime rather than just being tough on crime. Everybody wants violent criminals off the street. I do. I spent my time prosecuting child sexual assault cases, and I'm a parent and a member of this county. But we have to be smarter about criminal penalty, and we especially have to be smarter about incarcerating people.
Thank you. One more question before closing statements. What sort of investment will you make? And this is a big concern, is mass incarceration. what sort of an investment will you make in alternatives to incarceration for people with mental illness, substance abuse, etc.? You spoke to it a little earlier, but is there anything in particular, any programs in particular, or steps you would take towards doing away with mass incarceration?
Yes, on day one, I will allow my assistant prosecutors to engage and participate in our drug treatment court and our veterans court, which our current prosecutor refuses to do. And so the legislation had to be rewritten in 2008 on an emergency basis because she wouldn't participate. We're the only county in the entire state where our prosecutors can't participate in our treatment courts. But I'm not going to stop there. I also am committed to working with the bench, and many of them are my former colleagues, and there's a lot of support to develop a mental health treatment court. So many people in the Oakland County Jail right now are there because they have a mental health issue. So many people in my courtroom were there because they had a mental health issue. We need to address this, and we're not doing it. And these problem-solving courts are, there's great data that suggests that they work. Increasing criminal penalties for somebody who's got a serious mental illness is not going to make them better, and B, it's not a deterrent to crime, because the reason they're committing the crime is because of the serious mental health issue. So that is one thing I know there's a lot of support for, there's a lot of resources for. We have the privilege of being in a county where we have resources for that. There's also grants for that. So I'm very excited to start that and participate in it. And it's a way of diverting people from incarceration so that they can actually get treatment.
Thank you, Karen.
Mm-hmm.
And finally, it's time for your closing statement. You have 1 minute.
Well, it's unfortunate that Jessica Cooper couldn't join us. I think it's always a good thing when people can see the drastic difference between the two of us. But I just want to say that my campaign has received every single labor endorsement there is to receive. I was just endorsed by the UAW, the MEA, and 20 others. I'm happy to announce here on the Zoom call that I today was endorsed by our Lieutenant Governor, Garland Gilchrist, which means a lot to me because he really champions criminal justice reform. Our Attorney General, Femmes for Dems, has approved me as a candidate. I can't even list all of the endorsements I have, the Oakland County Democratic Black Caucus. There's an army of people, in addition to that, who have come forward who don't even know me, that really believe in change and reform and want this for our county. And that's why I'm running, and that's the prosecutor you're going to get on August 4th. So please join me and support. Go to my website, McDonaldforprosecutor.com, and my Facebook page, and join the army, because people want change and reform, and I'm happy to give it to them.
Thank you so much, Karen McDonald, our candidate for prosecuting attorney in Oakland County. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for the opportunity.
So ends another successful candidate forum. So I'd like to thank all the candidates who joined us tonight and shared their vision for Oakland County. And thank you, Kent and Louise and Renee and everyone at the 11th District Dems who put this forum together. It takes a lot of work and a lot of logistical organization. And sometimes it doesn't go as you quite plan, but it somehow always comes out in the end to be a good, productive evening. And I applaud everyone who tuned into the forum as well. Just by being here, you've become a more educated voter, and you've helped strengthen our democracy. Elizabeth Warren said in one of her speeches, voting is the heartbeat of democracy. And I really think if that's the case, then getting involved in the political process is its lifeblood. So thanks for being a part of that, and thanks for having me tonight.
Thank you, Sherry. So I want to take time as the chair of the district to thank Sherry Mason for being our moderator this evening. She was incredible. I want to thank Louise for being our timekeeper. Louise is selling one of our shirts right now. And I want to thank you, the audience, for joining us tonight. I also want to humbly apologize for Jessica Cooper not being able to make it tonight, as that was an oversight on my part. I unfortunately surely forgot the agreement we had made about 3 weeks ago to deal with the time for the prosecutor's portion. But aside from that, I'm happy that everything else went out without a hitch. I hope that you folks are currently getting your absentee ballots, and we'll take everything you heard into consideration tonight. And with that, that being said, I hope to see you again in our meeting, which we're going to be having in about 2 weeks at 7 o'clock on Wednesday, July 15th. Thank you so much, and have a good night, everyone.